Napoli fans around the world, welcome to Napoli Talk. After tying 1-1 with Real Sociedad in a tough game, Napoli have qualified first in the Europa League group and are through to the next round in the knockout phases. And before I get into the game, I'd just like to remind everyone that this was a very special occasion because it was the first game that Napoli are playing in the Stadio Diego Armando Maradona. But going back to the game, Napoli did not have the best performance. In fact, we were very, very poor, and we will go into that a bit later. Before we do that, let's start with the positive, and so let's look at the Europa League standings. So after 6 games, the group ends with Napoli and Real Sociedad through with 11 and 9 points respectively. AZ misses out by 1 point with 8. Rijeka manages to get 4 points after beating AZ 2-1 in the final moments of their own game. So mission accomplished for Napoli. We will avoid the Champions League teams that are coming down, and this is really all we wanted from Napoli. We didn't necessarily want them to play the best of football. We didn't want them to waste a lot of energy. We just wanted them to get the job done, and it must be said that today's poor performance must have something to do with the fact that Napoli entered this game knowing that a draw would get them through, as we did today. And even a loss would have gotten us through if AZ failed to win, which ended up happening. In fact, they lost. But anyways, now it is finally time to talk about the game, and I like to just touch on a few key points before we go into a very detailed technical and tactical analysis. So the key takeaway from today's game was that Real Sociedad put us under a lot of pressure, and when the score was 0-0, they had the best opportunity in the game to actually score, and it should have been 1-0. They had this huge chance in front of goal where the ball was square to the striker and he misses from a few yards out, not sure how. But this all started with Maksimovic misjudging the flight of the ball, getting caught out with his speed, and overall the defense being in a really bad position, and we see that time and time again throughout the game. And Real Sociedad, they put a lot of pressure on Napoli. They were man-marking us very heavily, and they had several other chances to score. They were slicing through our defense and our midfield, and we'll see why a bit later on. But they should have really scored their 1-1 and maybe even more goals a lot sooner. Having said that, Napoli were denied very clear goal-scoring opportunities where Real Sociedad should have seen red, with Lozano cutting in through their defense, and the last man would consistently take him down. And the ref at one point did not even give a yellow card to Real Sociedad. They gave a yellow card to Mertens for protesting and a corner for Napoli. And once again, I find myself complaining about referees, and that's not something I want to do, but it's becoming a very consistent story in Napoli's games recently. And then the last talking point before the tactical analysis is obviously Zielinski's goal. That goal, that beautiful, beautiful goal, is a goal that I'd like to see more and more and more of. They showed about 10 replays, but honestly, I felt like that wasn't enough. I wanted to see that just throughout the game. I wasn't liking what I was seeing on the field, and I was just hoping that they would re-show that Zielinski goal to cheer me up. But now finally, let's go into the tactical analysis of where it all went wrong for Napoli in this game. So I'll be showing 3 different scenarios that sum up Napoli's game, and they are all linked by the fact that we were simply not supporting one another in any of the phases of the game. So the first one that I want to go over is our transition from the 4-5-1 defensive formation to the 4-4-2 and then back to a 4-5-1. Now, we usually defend in a 4-5-1, as you can see in this picture, when the opponents are pressing us a bit into our own half. But then when the ball moves back a little bit, back towards the midfield, then we transition into a 4-4-2. And when we go into this 4-4-2, Fabian pushes up and Lozano needs to tighten onto the man in between the lines, because he is the one that will be causing us a lot of trouble if we don't mark him. He is the one that is capable of dribbling past players, passing it on to the strikers, shooting from long range, so we really want to avoid that man from having the ball. Now the trouble is that this 4-4-2 has to transition very quickly back into a 4-5-1 when the ball is pushed to the sides, to the wingers, and so this is when Lozano needs to go back down onto the wing, and Fabian then needs to go from the front two into his midfield role once again, because he needs to cover that man that we were talking about before. The issue is, if Fabian does not do that quickly, then that player has the freedom to go in behind Lozano and get into the space. And this unfortunately happened very frequently. Fabian was very slow in getting back into position. Their player that we circled was getting the ball very consistently and causing us a lot of trouble. And this is where I think we need someone like Demme instead of Fabian, because Demme is a lot more dynamic than Fabian. He can go and press and then come back into position, into a more defensive position very, very quickly, because he's naturally more inclined to do that. Whereas Fabian in these transitions is a bit too slow to do this consistently. Now, another area that we were struggling a lot was our build-up play, both when we were having the ball in our own area or near our own area, but also in the midfield. And let's start off with the midfield. We have a situation where Napoli are struggling to get the ball forward to build up play, and Zielinski sees that. He tries to help out, go back into the midfield, and that, however, leaves a void in the number 10 position. And normally what should happen when Zielinski goes back into the midfield is that someone needs to fill in that void. And in this case, I picked Insigne for an example, but actually that could be Bakayoko going into that position a lot more quickly, or it could be Lozano or Mertens or any other person. But someone needs to be in that number 10 position to link up the midfield and attack. And that's what was missing. You can see here there's a lot of space between the two lines, and that is just simply not going to allow Napoli to play the ball around very quickly. Now, this is a situation that happens quite often with Napoli, and it is somewhat masked by the fact that Zielinski is a very good dribbler, so he could get past one person and then he's naturally back into that number 10 area. However, Napoli can't rely on Zielinski to always get past his man, and that's why we need someone in that position ready to collect the ball when Zielinski drops back. Another area where we struggled to support each other and really put in the effort was when we were playing from the very back. So in this case, there's a situation where Di Lorenzo has the ball and he's forced to launch it all the way up to Mertens. Mertens is obviously man-marked by a very big defender compared to him, and he's always going to lose out on that battle and lose out on the ball. But Di Lorenzo, unfortunately, was almost forced into this. Now, this could have been avoided if Bakayoko would come closer to Di Lorenzo, drag an opponent with him, and free up some space right behind him. Zielinski, who finds himself free, could come into that space, and for Di Lorenzo it would be a simple lob pass over Bakayoko into Zielinski, and Zielinski can get the ball and run away with it. However, neither Zielinski nor Bakayoko were quick enough to help out Di Lorenzo in that situation, and he had no choice but to boot it upfield. So it wasn't the best performance overall by Napoli, but we managed to get the job done, and that's all that really matters. And now we can go on to the player ratings. So for me, the best player on the field today for us was definitely Lozano. I'm giving him a 7.5. Defensively, he was very aware. He was very good in the transitions. He was covering very well, and then when we did attack, he was super dangerous with his cuts in behind the midfield and defense of Real Sociedad. He was always with his head up trying to look for a pass, and really he was the one player that seemed most likely to score at any given moment. So incredible effort by Lozano. I'm going to give him a 7.5, and he's been improving consistently over the past few weeks. Another player that scores very highly is Zielinski. I'm going to give him a 7, and that's mainly because of the goal. It's the goal that allowed us to go forward in a very difficult moment for Napoli, and what a goal it was. And that shot needs to be rewarded with a 7. It doesn't matter that he didn't have his best game in midfield or in that number 10 position. That shot alone deserves a 7. And maybe a bit surprisingly for some of you guys, I'm going to give Petagna a 6.5. I thought when he came on in the last 20 minutes, he was crucial for Napoli, won us a lot of headers in our own box, defensively helped out in the midfield, dropping back, and just overall very good link up between the attack and midfield, and that's the kind of player that you need when you're 1-0 up, 20 minutes to go. But we've discovered, however, I think in this game that he's not a clinical finisher, because he had one chance to get on the score sheet. The ball was on his feet in the box. All he had to do was turn, shoot with his right foot, but instead he decides to pass it back to Elmas. And for me, this shows he doesn't have the natural killer instinct that maybe someone like Milik had. But at the same time, I'm not going to penalize him too much for that today, because we were winning. We didn't really need that goal from him today. All we needed from him was to protect the ball and help out defensively, and he did that very, very well. However, there were two players that I think stood out negatively from everyone, and that has to be, first off, Fabian with a 5. I thought he was very slow in midfield in the different transitions. He held onto the ball a bit too much, which helped Real Sociedad put a lot of pressure on us. He was very clumsy in some of his tackles, losing the ball quite often, and even got nutmegged at one point. Just a very bad display from Fabian. And then unfortunately, I really hate to do this, but I have to give a 5.5 to Gulam. I think it's partly his fault that we conceded a goal in the end. He was a bit clumsy in the way he jumped to the ball, lost sight of it, and Real Sociedad were able to make the most out of that opportunity. And I think this moment here shows us that Gulam unfortunately just isn't ready to be back in the Napoli squad, and we can't rely on him. He has good performances against very simple teams such as Rijeka, but then when it's up against some of the big boys like Real Sociedad, he's going to struggle. Instead, I think everyone else deserves a 6, nothing too catastrophic, but also nothing great. They just basically showed up, did the minimum they could to get by, and went back home. And that's, I think, the same rating I'd have to give Gattuso. He did just enough that Napoli managed to scrape a point out of this, get past the group. But clearly there's a lot of work that needs to go into this Napoli team still. Anyways, guys, smash that like button and subscribe for more Napoli talk. That is everything from me, and Forza Napoli sempre.